The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Maya walked down the bustling city street, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder. She'd just finished an intense study session at the library, where she'd been preparing for her upcoming psychology midterms. Her mom had texted earlier, asking if she could pick up some ingredients for their special family dinner that evening. Maya smiled, thinking about how her family always came together for these monthly dinners. It was a tradition they'd kept alive even after she started college. Tonight was extra special. Her dad was finally coming back from his 2-week business trip, and she couldn't wait to surprise him with his favorite dish. As she approached Morton's Premium Grocers, she paused to check her shopping list one more time. The store's fancy glass doors and elegant displays had always impressed her, even though she'd been shopping there with her parents since she was little. The familiar ding of the automatic doors welcomed her as she stepped inside, the cool air conditioning a pleasant relief from the warm afternoon sun. Maya was wearing her comfortable college attire, a simple hoodie, jeans, and her trusty sneakers that had carried her through countless campus walks. Her curly hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she hadn't bothered with makeup after her long study session. She grabbed a shopping cart and pulled out her phone, where she'd saved her mom's recipe instructions. The store was relatively quiet for a weekday afternoon. Soft classical music played overhead as Maya navigated through the aisles, occasionally stopping to admire new products that caught her eye. She'd always loved exploring the international section, fascinated by ingredients from around the world. Her dad had taught her about different cuisines during their cooking sessions, and these memories made grocery shopping feel like a treasure hunt. She carefully selected fresh herbs from the produce section, remembering how her dad had shown her to check for the most aromatic ones. The basil leaves had to be just right, not too wilted, not too dark. Next came what Maya didn't realize was that this ordinary afternoon was about to become extraordinary. As she stood there in her casual college clothes, focused on her shopping list, she had no idea that she was about to become part of a story that would teach everyone involved a valuable lesson about assumptions, respect, and the power of maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice. The peaceful atmosphere of Maya's shopping trip shattered when Mr. Brooks, the store manager, emerged from behind the imported goods display. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, wearing a crisp blue suit with a name tag that gleamed under the store's bright lights. His face wore an expression that Maya had seen before, that look of unwarranted suspicion that made her heart sink. "Can I help you find something?" His voice carried a sharp edge that didn't match the polite words. Maya noticed how he positioned himself between her and the exit of the aisle, his stance more confrontational than helpful. She took a deep breath, remembering her mom's words about staying calm in difficult situations. "No, thank you," Maya replied with a gentle smile. "I know exactly what I'm looking for." She reached for another item on her list, trying to continue her shopping as normal. But Mr. Brooks didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and watched her every movement with obvious distrust. "Those are very expensive items in your cart," he commented, his eyes scanning the premium ingredients she'd carefully selected. "Are you sure you're in the right store?" The emphasis he placed on right made his meaning crystal clear, and Maya felt her cheeks grow warm. A few other customers had stopped to watch the interaction, some pretending to examine nearby products while stealing glances at the scene unfolding before them. An elderly lady with silver hair frowned disapprovingly at the manager's behavior, while a young man in a business suit suddenly became very interested in reading the label of a jar he picked up. Maya straightened her shoulders, just as her father had taught her. "I've been shopping here for years," she explained calmly, though her heart was racing. "These ingredients are for a family dinner tonight." She reached for her phone, ready to show him her shopping list, but Mr. Brooks took a step closer. "I find that hard to believe," he said, his voice rising slightly. "This is a premium store, and those items," he gestured at her cart, "are some of our most expensive products. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable shopping somewhere more suitable for your budget." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. A young mother shopping nearby pulled her child closer, looking uncomfortable. The elderly lady who had been watching dropped a jar of olives into her cart with more force than necessary, making her disapproval clear. "Sir," Maya began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I understand you're doing your job, but I'm a regular customer here." "I know exactly what I'm buying and why," She gestured to her cart. "Everything here is for a special family dinner." Mr. Brooks' face hardened. "Store policy requires me to ensure the security of our premium products." He reached for his radio. "I think we need to have security check your bag. We've had some issues with certain people lately." The way he said certain people made Maya's stomach knot. She noticed more customers gathering, some whispering among themselves. A teenage employee stocking shelves nearby looked deeply uncomfortable, almost apologetic as he caught Maya's eye. "I haven't done anything wrong," Maya stated firmly, though her voice was quiet. "I'm simply trying to buy ingredients for my family's dinner." She held Mr. Brooks' gaze, refusing to be intimidated despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "That's what they all say," he responded dismissively. "Security will be here shortly to check your bag. In the meantime, I'll need you to step away from these items." He gestured to her carefully selected groceries as if they were evidence in a crime scene. Maya looked at her cart, filled with ingredients she'd chosen with such care: the special cheese her dad loved, the premium pasta, the fresh herbs. Each item represented a piece of the wonderful evening she planned. Now they had become props in this public display of prejudice. "I won't let you check my bag," she said softly but firmly. "I've done nothing to warrant this treatment." Her hands were steady now, strength flowing from somewhere deep inside her. She thought of her parents, of all they'd taught her about maintaining dignity in the face of ignorance. Mr. Brooks' face reddened. "Listen here, young lady," he began, his voice rising. "This is an exclusive establishment. We have standards to maintain. If you can't prove you can afford these items, or prove you belong here." A small crowd had gathered now, creating an audience for this unnecessary drama. Some looked away in embarrassment, others watched with uncomfortable fascination. Maya could hear whispers, see phones being pulled out discreetly. Her simple shopping trip had become a spectacle, all because of one man's prejudiced assumptions. But Maya stood her ground, her posture straight, her voice unwavering. Even as security approached from the front of the store, she maintained her composure. She thought of her father, who had always taught her that true dignity comes from how you handle difficult moments. Little did Mr. Brooks know that his actions were about to backfire in a way he never could have anticipated. The security guard was just reaching the aisle when everything was about to change. Maya couldn't see it yet, but fate had perfect timing. Sometimes the best lessons come when we least expect them, and Mr. Brooks was about to learn one of the most important lessons of his career. The security guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, approached slowly. He seemed hesitant, perhaps sensing that something wasn't quite right about this situation. Maya noticed how he glanced between her and Mr. Brooks, taking in the scene with a thoughtful expression. "What seems to be the problem here?" the guard asked, his tone professional but gentle. Before Maya could respond, Mr. Brooks jumped in, his voice carrying through the aisle. "This young lady needs to have her bag checked," he announced, as if declaring a shoplifting emergency. "She's been handling our most expensive items, and I have concerns about her ability to afford them." The pause before ability made his real meaning painfully clear. Maya took another deep breath, drawing strength from memories of similar situations her parents had guided her through. "Sir," she addressed the security guard directly, her voice calm and clear, "I'm a regular customer here. I'm simply buying ingredients for a family dinner. Mr. Brooks has been following me and making assumptions without any cause." The small crowd of onlookers had grown. A young couple whispered to each other, the woman shaking her head in disapproval at the manager's behavior. An older gentleman in a business suit had stopped pretending to shop and was now openly watching, his expression troubled. The security guard looked at Maya's shopping cart, noting the carefully selected items. Nothing was thrown in haphazardly. Each product had been chosen with obvious care and knowledge. He'd worked at the store long enough to know the difference between a genuine shopper and someone with bad intentions. "Mr. Brooks," the guard began carefully, "I don't see any suspicious behavior here." But the manager wasn't having it. "Look at her." Mr. Brooks gestured at Maya's casual college outfit. "Look at what she's wearing. People who shop in our store don't dress like that." His voice dripped with judgment, making several onlookers shift uncomfortably. Maya felt her throat tighten, but she refused to let tears form. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened her shopping list. These items are for my father's favorite pasta dish, she explained, her voice steady. The recipe calls for specific ingredients. I can show you the list, though I shouldn't have to prove my right to shop here. A middle-aged woman who had been watching stepped forward. This is ridiculous, she said firmly. I shop here in my gym clothes all the time, and nobody questions me. The pointed look she gave Mr. Brooks spoke volumes about what she thought was the real issue. The security guard seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his role in this situation. He'd clearly been called to handle a threat that didn't exist. Maya could see him struggling with his professional obligations versus what he knew was right. Young lady, he said gently, would you mind just showing us your receipt for any previous purchases here? That might help clear this up. He was trying to offer a compromise, but Maya stood her ground. I shouldn't have to prove my history as a customer, she replied, polite but firm. I've done nothing wrong. My appearance or what I'm wearing shouldn't determine how I'm treated in this store. An elderly man who had been watching spoke up from behind his shopping cart. I've seen this young lady here before with her parents, he offered. They're regular customers. But Mr. Brooks seemed to grow more agitated with each person who came to Maya's defense. That's impossible, he scoffed. I would remember if someone like her was a regular customer at my store. His emphasis on my store rang through the aisle, making several people flinch at his obvious prejudice. Maya felt a strange calm settle over her. She'd faced situations like this before, maybe not quite so public, but similar. Her parents had always taught her that maintaining dignity doesn't mean being quiet in the face of injustice. Mr. Brooks, she said, her voice clear and steady, I understand you're doing what you think is your job, but you're making assumptions based on how I look, not on my actions. I've selected these items carefully because I know exactly what I need. I know this store's layout because I've been shopping here for years. I can tell you where every item in my cart is normally stocked. The security guard looked increasingly convinced by Maya's composed demeanor and logical arguments. Even some of the store employees who had gathered were exchanging knowing looks, clearly uncomfortable with their manager's behavior. Sir, the guard turned to Mr. Brooks. I don't see any reason to. But Mr. Brooks cut him off. No, this ends now. Either she allows us to check her bag and verify she can pay for these items, or she leaves the store. He crossed his arms, clearly expecting Maya to back down. Instead, she reached for her phone again, this time not for the shopping list. You know what? She said quietly, I think it's time to make a call. Her finger hovered over the screen as she looked directly at Mr. Brooks. But before I do, I want to ask you one thing. Are you absolutely sure you want to continue treating me this way? There was something in her calm confidence that made Mr. Brooks hesitate for the first time. The security guard took a small step back, sensing a shift in the situation. The atmosphere in the aisle changed, like the moment before a storm breaks. What no one in that crowded aisle knew, except Maya, was that everything was about to change. The call she was about to make would transform this humiliating moment into something none of them would ever forget. Just as Maya was about to make her call, the automatic doors at the front of the store slid open with their familiar chime. A tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. Mr. Chen, Maya's father and CEO of Morton's Premium Grocers, had decided to make a surprise visit to this location after his business trip. He paused just inside the entrance, taking in the unusual scene before him. The typical peaceful atmosphere of his store had been replaced by a crowd gathered around aisle 7. Years of retail experience told him something was wrong. As he moved closer, he could hear raised voices, one particularly aggressive, the other calm and familiar. That's when he saw her, his daughter, Maya, standing straight and composed, surrounded by onlookers while his store manager gesticulated angrily. Mr. Chen felt his heart tighten, immediately understanding what was happening. He'd seen that look on his daughter's face before, the one that meant she was holding herself together with quiet strength. I've already told you, Mr. Brooks was saying, his voice echoing through the store, people like you need to prove they can afford to shop here. This isn't some common grocery store. We have a certain clientele to maintain. Mr. Chen watched as his daughter responded with remarkable composure. And I've told you, I'm a regular customer. I know this store. I know these products. I shouldn't have to prove my right to shop here. The crowd parted slightly as Mr. Chen moved closer, though no one noticed him yet. He saw the security guard looking increasingly uncomfortable, clearly realizing this situation had nothing to do with actual security concerns. He noticed the disapproving looks from other customers, the whispers, the phones discreetly recording the incident. Maya's shopping cart caught his eye, all the ingredients for his favorite pasta dish, perfectly selected. His heart swelled with pride and ached with pain simultaneously. Here was his daughter, trying to prepare a welcome home dinner for him, being treated like a criminal in his own store. Mr. Brooks was now reaching for Maya's cart. "If you won't let us check your bag, then you'll have to leave these items and exit the store. We can't have people like you." "People like who, exactly?" Mr. Chen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. The crowd turned, startled by the new voice. Mr. Brooks froze, his hand still on Maya's cart. Maya's eyes widened as she saw her father. She hadn't expected him until evening. This was supposed to be a surprise dinner. Now here he was, witnessing this humiliating scene. But somehow, seeing him standing there, radiating quiet authority, made everything feel different. Mr. Brooks straightened up, plastering on his professional smile. "Ah, Mr. Chen, what an unexpected pleasure. I was just dealing with a situation." "I can see exactly what situation you're dealing with," Mr. Chen interrupted, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made Mr. Brooks step back. "You're harassing my daughter in my store." The word daughter seemed to echo through the aisle. Mr. Brooks' face went from red to pale in seconds. The security guard took another step back, realization dawning on his face. The watching crowd broke into murmurs of surprise and understanding. "Your daughter?" Mr. Brooks stammered, looking between Maya and Mr. Chen with growing horror. "But I didn't." "Yes, my daughter," Mr. Chen confirmed, moving to stand beside Maya. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Who, as she's been trying to tell you, has indeed been shopping here her entire life." He looked at the cart. "And I see she still remembers exactly how I like my pasta prepared." The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd watched as Mr. Brooks seemed to shrink into himself, his earlier arrogance evaporating. Some of the onlookers who had been filming quickly put their phones away, looking almost embarrassed to have witnessed such a profound moment of realization. Maya leaned slightly into her father's supportive touch, finally allowing herself to relax a little. The evening hadn't gone as planned. Her surprise dinner was no longer a surprise, but somehow this moment felt important in a different way. "Dad," she said softly, "I was trying to make your favorite dinner for your return." Her voice carried clearly in the hushed aisle, making the situation even more poignant. Mr. Chen looked at his daughter with pride. "I saw the ingredients you picked, perfect choices as always." Then he turned his attention back to Mr. Brooks, who was still standing there, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "Mr. Brooks," Mr. Chen said, his voice level but firm, "I think we need to have a conversation in my office. But first," he looked around at the gathered crowd, at the security guard, at the other employees who had been watching. This moment, he realized, could be more than just a confrontation. It could be a teaching opportunity. The walk to the store's office felt like the longest journey of Mr. Brooks' life. Every step echoed with the weight of his actions as he followed Mr. Chen and Maya. The crowd had dispersed, but their whispers still hung in the air. Store employees pretended to be busy while stealing glances at the trio making their way to the back of the store. Mr. Chen's office was simple but elegant, with family photos decorating one wall. Photos that, Mr. Brooks now noticed with a sinking feeling, clearly showed Maya growing up in this very store. There was even one of her as a little girl, sitting on the very counter he'd just accused her of not being able to afford shopping at. "Please, sit down," Mr. Chen gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Maya took one seat, her composure still intact, while Mr. Brooks sank into the other, looking like a man preparing for his own execution. "Before we begin," Mr. Chen said, remaining standing, "I want to be clear about something. This conversation isn't about punishment, it's about understanding." He leaned against his desk, his expression thoughtful. "Maya, would you like to share your experience?" Maya straightened in her chair, looking directly at Mr. Brooks. "This wasn't the first time something like this has happened to me," she began quietly. "Usually it's more subtle, People following me in stores, security guards suddenly appearing wherever I go, cashiers double-checking my credit card. She paused, letting her words sink in. But this was the first time someone was so open about their assumptions. Mr. Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I was just trying to protect the store's interests, he mumbled, but his voice lacked conviction. Were you? Mr. Chen asked gently. Or were you acting on assumptions you didn't even realize you were making? He reached for a folder on his desk. Your record shows you're an excellent manager in many ways. Sales are good, inventory is well managed, staff turnover is low. But today revealed a blind spot that we need to address. The office fell silent for a moment. Through the window, they could see customers shopping, employees working, the normal flow of store life continuing while this pivotal conversation took place. Do you know why I started this grocery chain? Mr. Chen asked suddenly. Mr. Brooks shook his head. When I first came to this country, I couldn't shop in certain stores without being treated exactly how you treated my daughter today. He walked over to the photo wall, touching one old picture. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd create stores where everyone would be treated with respect, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. Maya watched her father, seeing the emotion in his eyes as he shared this story. Mr. Brooks, too, seemed transfixed by the revelation. But today, Mr. Chen continued, turning back to face them, in my own store, my daughter couldn't buy ingredients for a family dinner without being humiliated. The very thing I built this company to fight against happened under our own roof. I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks said, and for the first time, his voice carried genuine remorse. I never thought, I didn't realize. That's exactly the point, Maya interjected softly. You didn't realize. You saw what you expected to see, not what was actually there. Mr. Chen nodded approvingly at his daughter's insight. The question now is, what do we do about it? Mr. Brooks looked up, expecting the worst. Instead, he saw something unexpected in Mr. Chen's expression, not anger, but determination. Sir, Mr. Brooks began, his voice shaky, I understand if you want my resignation. Actually, Mr. Chen interrupted, I have a different idea. He pulled out another folder from his desk. Our company is about to launch a new training program on inclusive customer service and fighting unconscious bias. We need someone who understands firsthand why it's necessary, someone who can speak from experience about how these biases can blind us. Maya's eyes lit up, understanding where her father was going with this. Mr. Brooks looked confused, but hopeful. Instead of firing you, Mr. Chen continued, I want you to be part of creating change. You'll work with our training team, sharing your experience from today. You'll help other employees understand how these biases can affect their behavior, even when they don't realize it. The tension in Mr. Brooks' shoulders began to ease slightly. You want me to help prevent this from happening to others? Exactly, Maya chimed in, her voice warm with understanding. Sometimes the best teachers are those who've learned the hardest lessons themselves. Mr. Chen smiled at his daughter's wisdom. The question is, Mr. Brooks, are you willing to learn from this? Are you ready to be part of the solution? Mr. Brooks looked between father and daughter, seeing not the anger or resentment he deserved, but an opportunity for growth and redemption. His eyes welled up with tears as the full impact of the day's events, and the gracious response to them, hit him. The weeks following that fateful day brought remarkable changes to Morton's premium grocers. Mr. Brooks, true to his word, threw himself into the new role with surprising enthusiasm. The man who had once profiled customers was now leading conversations about unconscious bias and inclusive customer service. The first training session was held in the store's conference room, with every employee present. Mr. Brooks stood at the front, his hands slightly shaking as he began to speak. A month ago, I thought I was protecting our store's standards, he began, his voice quiet but clear. Instead, I was revealing my own prejudices. I want to tell you about the day I learned the hardest and most important lesson of my career. The room was silent as he recounted the story. Some employees who had witnessed the incident nodded, remembering. Others looked shocked as they heard how their manager had treated the CEO's daughter. But what struck everyone was the humility and honesty in Mr. Brooks' voice. The easy thing would have been to fire me, he continued. Instead, Mr. Chen and his daughter showed me what true leadership looks like. They turned my mistake into an opportunity for all of us to learn and grow. Maya had been invited to join these training sessions, sharing her perspective as someone who had faced such prejudice repeatedly. She spoke about the small indignities she'd encountered in various stores, the constant need to prove she belonged, the exhaustion of dealing with others' assumptions. It's not just about one incident, she explained to the attentive audience. It's about the countless small moments that build up over time. The way someone's smile drops when you walk into a high-end store. The extra attention from security guards. The surprised looks when you pull out a premium credit card. The training program expanded beyond just customer service. Mr. Brooks worked with the human resources team to revise hiring practices, ensuring they were bringing in diverse perspectives at every level. He reviewed store policies, identifying and eliminating rules that might unintentionally discriminate against certain customers. One day, about 2 months after the incident, an elderly woman approached Mr. Brooks in the store. "I was here that day," she said softly. "I saw how you treated that young lady, but I've also been watching how you've changed since then. It takes courage to learn from our mistakes like that." The store's atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Employees were more conscious of their interactions with all customers. The security team received specific training about profiling and bias. Even the way products were displayed was reviewed to ensure the store felt welcoming to everyone. Mr. Chen observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. He'd taken a risk in not firing Mr. Brooks, but watching the transformation unfold confirmed he'd made the right choice. One afternoon, he overheard a new employee telling a colleague, "You know, this is the first retail job I've had where they actually talk about these issues openly. It's not just some corporate policy we ignore." Maya continued shopping at the store, now often stopping to chat with Mr. Brooks about the program's progress. That unlikely friendship became a testimony to the power of forgiveness and growth. Sometimes, customers who recognized them from that day would stop and listen to their conversations, amazed by the positive change that had emerged from such a negative situation. The training program's success caught the attention of other retailers in the area. Mr. Chen began receiving requests from other store managers, asking if they could send their staff to participate in the training sessions. What had started as one store's response to an incident was becoming a model for retail businesses throughout the region. Mr. Brooks kept the photo from that day, the security camera image of him confronting Maya on his office desk. "It reminds me," he explained to anyone who asked, "that our worst moments can lead to our greatest growth if we're willing to learn from them." One particularly meaningful moment came when a young employee approached Mr. Brooks after a training session. "I used to be afraid to speak up when I saw things that weren't right," she admitted. "But seeing how this store handled what happened, how you turned it into something positive, it gives me hope that real change is possible." The store's regular customers noticed the change too. The atmosphere had become more welcoming, more inclusive. People from all walks of life now shopped there comfortably, knowing they would be treated with respect regardless of their appearance or attire. Even the stockroom conversations had changed. Where once employees might have whispered about suspicious-looking customers, they now discussed ways to make everyone feel welcome. The security team, once known for following certain customers around the store, now prided themselves on treating everyone with equal respect and dignity. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Morton's Premium Grocers hosted a special evening event. The store stayed open late, its aisles filled with people gathered to celebrate something remarkable: the launch of their company-wide training program, now being implemented in every branch across the country. Mr. Brooks stood at the front of the store, beside Mr. Chen and Maya, looking at the crowd of faces before him. Store managers from other locations, employees, regular customers, and even local business leaders had come to learn about the program that had started with one difficult moment and grown into something much bigger. A year ago, Mr. Brooks began, his voice steady and confident now. "I stood in aisle 7 and made assumptions about a young customer that revealed my own prejudices. Today, that moment has led to changes none of us could have imagined." The crowd listened intently as he shared statistics from the past year. Customer satisfaction scores had risen dramatically, employee retention had improved, and most importantly, the store had become a true community hub where everyone felt welcome. Maya stepped forward to speak next. She had become an integral part of the training program, balancing her college studies with regular visits to different store locations to share her story. "What happened to me that day wasn't unique," she explained. "What was unique was how we chose to respond to it. Instead of anger and punishment, we chose education and growth." The proof of their success was evident in the daily life of the store. Earlier that week, a teenage girl in a hijab had been shopping for specialty ingredients. A year ago, she might have felt uncomfortable or watched. Now, she chatted easily with staff members who helped her find what she needed, no questions asked about her right to be there. Mr. Chen shared how the program had evolved beyond their initial expectations. "We've trained over 1,000 employees across our stores," he announced proudly. "But more importantly, we've changed the culture. Our staff don't just follow rules about treating people equally, they understand why it matters." The evening included a cooking demonstration in the store's new community kitchen, a space created after Maya suggested that sharing food could help bring people together. Mr. Brooks and Maya worked side by side, preparing the same pasta dish she'd been shopping for on that fateful day. "Food has no prejudice," Maya told the gathered crowd as she stirred the sauce. "It brings people together, helps us share our stories and understand each other better." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very ingredients that had once caused such conflict were now being used to celebrate unity. Local news stations covered the event, interviewing employees about the changes they'd seen. One cashier, who had worked at the store for 20 years, tearfully shared how the new program had made her confront her own hidden biases. "I thought I treated everyone the same," she admitted, "but the training helped me see the small ways I was making assumptions without realizing it." The success stories kept coming. Other retail chains had started reaching out, asking to implement similar programs in their stores. Mr. Brooks, once feared for his strict management style, was now sought after as a speaker at retail industry conferences, sharing how one moment of confronting his prejudices had transformed not just his career, but his entire worldview. Maya's father watched all of this with quiet pride. His daughter's dignity in the face of discrimination had sparked a movement that was changing lives. The store he built with dreams of inclusion was finally becoming what he'd always envisioned. As the evening wound down, a small group gathered in aisle 7, the place where it all began. Someone had placed a small plaque there, reading, "Change begins with understanding. Understanding begins with listening." Mr. Brooks found Maya standing there, reading the plaque. "You know," he said softly, "I've helped train hundreds of employees now, but I'm still learning every day. Thank you for giving me that chance to learn." Maya smiled. "Thank you for being willing to learn," she replied. "That's what makes the difference." The store's closing announcement played overhead, but nobody moved to leave just yet. They stood there in aisle 7, Mr. Chen, Maya, Mr. Brooks, and the others who had been part of this journey, knowing that while they had come far, their work was still ongoing. "The best part," Maya said, looking around at the diverse group of people chatting and laughing together, "is that somewhere, right now, someone is walking into one of our stores feeling welcome, accepted, and respected. And they'll never know about the day that made it all possible." As people finally began to leave, Mr. Brooks locked up the store one last time that evening. He paused at the entrance, looking back at the aisles where prejudice had once walked freely, but where understanding now lived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to learn and grow. But tonight, in this moment, he could see how far they'd come, and how a single moment of confronting one's biases could lead to lasting change.